listening to the Astral Hour. I'm your host, Astral Meadow. Join me as we take a glimpse into the mysterious. Welcome, everyone. Today, I'm joined with my friend Shayn Jones. He hosts 4 different podcasts: Inquiries of Our Reality, Bizarre Encounters, Bite-Sized Bizarrities, and Big Dumb Inquiries, all under the umbrella of his production company, Open Minds Media. He is also a father of 2 beautiful children and enjoys studying things like folklore, tarot, and all things paranormal. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Long time coming. I've been trying to do this for a while, and it's been over a year since you've been on my show. So
I know. And then both of us, you had to cancel the first time because you had an emergency. Then I had some trauma, and then I was like, we are doing this. We're, I was so excited when you're like, yes, I'm free tonight. We're doing it. Because in my mind, it's just been on the calendar. So it's like getting moved. I'm like, I need to complete this project. It's been on my calendar for like months now. So
I think the original attempt was like 6 months ago, if that says anything.
Yeah. Well, we are committed to this conversation. So we've had time to reflect on it now. So for those who don't know you, could you share just a little background on yourself and your spiritual journey?
Well, I guess the best place to start is that I'm a podcaster, and I guess I could use the title of researcher now as far as what I do goes. I kind of started a podcast about a year ago called Inquiries of Our Reality. That was like my first show, my solo show. From there, it kind of expanded into this. I had an idea going in, but it ended up turning into its own thing. And at the end of it, I kind of just call it an open-minded talk show because I don't really know what else to call it. Because sometimes it's interviews, sometimes it's just bouncing theories back and forth, sometimes it's really deep conversation, but it always stays in the open-minded area. So that's, I feel like, the best place to really categorize it. But I mean, from there, I was doing this other show called Big Dumb Inquiries for a while with Kyle from the Big Dumb podcast. He had some stuff going on with family, changing his job. So that one's kind of up in the air currently. I'm hoping that we'll get back to doing it again, but that's more like a weekly. We're trying to do weekly, I guess, but like clip show where we just would bring clips in and make fun of them, talk about them, make conspiracies about stuff, depending on what it was. And then from there, I ended up starting Bizarre Encounters, which is, I was originally doing that with Ghost from My Third Eye. And then he eventually said he was working on some other stuff. He was working on another show with Ryan from Dangerous World. So he ended up leaving that show. So I ended up finding 2 new co-hosts for that show. So now I have Orrin and Jenny with me, who also do some research for something they call the Framework UFO research. And then I always make my little side tangents of my shows too. So it's like the main thing that I do is Inquiries of Our Reality is my open-minded solo open-minded talk show. And then Bizarre Encounters is my cryptid, alien, UFO, paranormal show where we have some people on for interviews. We talk about encounters. We do some deep dives into some stuff. So that's just as far as like my research background goes. So kind of been all over the spectrum as far as podcasting goes. And it's kind of been a journey along the way of some, like I said, some shift changes, some things hopefully happening for the better. And yeah, it's been a journey, but that's kind of where I'm at currently is, I guess, researcher and podcaster. It's probably the best thing to call me.
I love it. I love following your work, and you just do so many things. I feel like you're energetic. You're always coming up with some really creative stuff. And it's cool to see someone else podcasting too. So I don't know. It keeps me going just to know that, there's content to be made. There's all sorts of things that we could talk about. And it's just beautiful to just create these spaces for others to be able to listen.
I thought starting off that I was going to run out of things to talk about. I mean, even in the past year that I've been around, I've seen a lot of podcasts come and go. And I mean, everybody talked about when I first came in that there's going to be the people that start stuff up and don't end up sticking with it, and then the people that stick around. But you and I started around the same time. So it's like you were saying, it's like motivation to see people that started around the same time that are sticking around, because a lot of the ones that I've seen start off around the same time as us aren't doing their shows anymore. So kind of makes us feel a little bit special, like we're still making that push. And as far as I go, I'd like quit a lot of things in my life. So I had made a promise to myself when I first started my show that it was something that I wasn't going to quit. And I got too much time and effort invested into it. So as long as there's podcasts to be made and theories to be made and content to be talked about, then I'm going to be around doing my thing because I love doing it. So
Well, you're really good at it. So I just feel like with your podcast too, I mean, there's so much to explore. Like there's so because it is so open, you know. So it could be like spiritual topics, metaphysics, cryptids, alien. It's so cool because you literally can't cover it all. Like you could probably podcast every day and still come up with fresh content.
say when I started it off too, I had a totally different idea of the show, and it's kind of weird how it almost like fell into the name that I created for it because it was just one of those eureka moments where both my shows, I was just in the shower, and for whatever reason, water always helps me think, and then it just snaps into my head. And I'm just like, that's the name, that's it. So
Right.
when I first started it off, it was going to be like me and one other person, and we're going to discuss one particular topic, and then leave with like some kind of quotes or philosophy that had to do with it. And I was going to add something into it where it was like philosophy corner, and we talked about things like that. And like I did the first episode, and it was like called moral philosophy, and it it wasn't bad, I guess. It's everybody's first podcast. You're always going to be like, it's kind of cringy, but it kind of like started off with this one idea and kind of took shape into its own thing as I got rolling. I started talking to different people and kind of started expanding into everything. And then again, I realized that the name fit more than anything. And one of the biggest things I can always tell people starting off a podcast is you're going to have an idea of what you want going in, but you need to let your show develop organically and let it become what it's going to be. Because at the end of the day, your show ends up becoming like part of you. So you're
Yeah.
seeing through it. So you may have this is what I'm going to do. But if you restrict yourself to that, you'll never let your show be able to grow and really become like part of you. And in turn, again, I think subconsciously, I picked Inquiries of Our Reality because I questioned a lot of things in reality.
Yeah.
And it started off with just one particular topic, and it expanded into everything in reality gets questioned. So it's a
Right.
pretty broad spectrum, and it fits almost anything.
Yes, I love that we're both Aquarius risings, and that's literally the whole thing with Aquarius is sort of questioning like the structure of our society, of our reality, of like our beliefs, like and just I don't know, like redefining certain things, exploring and all that. And then, it puts Scorpio in our midheaven, which is like deep diving and researching. And so we both have that. And it's really cool because right before I met you, someone had just said that, oh, Aquarius risings are great podcasters because it puts Scorpio on their midheaven. And I was like, okay. And then I literally met you right after that and then looked at your chart and I was like, we have the same rising, like within like 5 degrees. So it's like our life has unfolded in very similar ways. But I feel like we're really doing what we're supposed to be doing, that this is a big part of what we're here for. So
I've said that a bunch of times too, that I never feel more like myself than when I'm like podcasting, just because I don't know. I feel comfortable where I'm like around my people, where more often than not, just in normal society, like I'm just one of those people that knows I just should keep my mouth shut. Otherwise, I'm going to get myself into trouble. Like, not even trying to be like rude to anybody, but just again, questioning everything, that just all of the current culture of everything. Half the time you just want to like ask questions and people get offended by it. And it's like, I'm not asking to be rude. Like, I'm just an
right,
inquisitive person. And the more
right,
questions I ask about things and the longer I do the show, the more I realize that like I don't have any set beliefs in like anything. Like, I
right.
entertain the idea of everything,
Yeah,
but at
me
the same
too.
time, because of that, it's like I could never set myself in stone in any one particular thing. Like, people ask
Yeah,
me about like religions and things, and I'm just like, I don't not believe in it, but
right,
I don't think it's solid. Like, it's a
right,
hard question. Like, I don't know anything for sure. Like, literally anything.
right. Yeah, I'm the same way. I'm fascinated by studying other religions and other types of spirituality and I definitely blend, and have some beliefs, but not to where I'm like devoted to a particular path. Like I do yoga and I do feel like that's a spiritual thing, but I don't consider myself like a yogi. Like I just can't take the term as like a thing. Like I like studying occult stuff. I don't necessarily consider myself an occultist because I just feel like that's limiting. So I'm like, well, I like to study a lot of things though, not just this one thing. So I don't know. I definitely think you're onto something with like don't box yourself in.
I think it's
So
one of those things too, that just like humans in general, we like to categorize things. So, and we like to name things. So there could be 100 different groups of people all looking at the same thing from 100 different perspectives, and then they're going to form an entire belief system based off of that. So, I mean, for me at least, when I started looking at more of the like macro when it comes to anything that's like religious belief, it's like I noticed more things that are similar than not similar.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard for me to say like I'm specifically this or specifically that, because I think that most religions are the same thing, just different perspectives of the same thing. And even when you get into like the multi-god religions too, you get
Mm-hmm.
into there's different connections with that with the regular religions too, and just like lesser beings being also still powerful godlike beings, but not being like the creator being. Like
Right.
it's a really hard question. Like I don't know how to answer it, because I think that all religions have an aspect of being right, but then there's
Right.
still also the aspect of human error to them. But at
Mm-hmm.
the end of the day, like I still believe that there's some type of like creator being. I just don't know what the specific name for it is, if it even has a
Right.
name. Because again, we're human. We just like to name things that don't necessarily have names. A
Right.
fox doesn't know it's a fox. A cat doesn't know it's a cat. Like it's only that because we call it. And if you go to a different language, it's a totally different name.
Right. Right. And it's just, I feel like it's different expressions of of the one. It's so it like it's okay to call it whatever you want, So that's why I'm like, I'm never offended when people come up to me and like talk about their religion. I just don't necessarily want to feel like I have to convert to be someone's friend. But outside of that, I'm always interested, into like what they're all about and things like that. And I can almost always find these links, but
It's
I
all about how
just
you come at it too. You just got to come at it not with a like told you so kind of way. Like I can have some deep conversations with some very religious people and still use the term like you know, universal consciousness or like creator being. And you
right.
can not offend people, because again, you just have to find a way to like word things. Like if you're just coming at somebody like pushing your beliefs on them and not being open-minded about it. I mean, that's half the problem with like society to begin with, is that you can have somebody on that's a diehard Christian on like this kind of show, for example, and get into a deep conversation, but you wouldn't have that same opportunity in the real world, because people are so held to their beliefs that a second you try to question everything, even if it's again for the intention of learning,
Mm,
people instantly become offended by it, where it kind of breaks that barrier on a show where you can ask the hard questions and people aren't getting instantly offended by them because they know you're asking for the sake of learning. And
right.
the only way people are ever going to get along is if you have the opportunity to ask the questions that people normally get offended by, because there's a reason why people get offended by those questions. It's because they're, again, the hard questions, but that's the things that divide the people. So if people actually have that opportunity to break down that barrier and actually have that conversation, be a lot less arguing between these like deep topics.
Right. Yeah. Um, a while back we had, some people that come door to door, and I'm not gonna name them. But they, spread their little message, and I would sit and talk to them and everything. And I just sort of got used to them coming around or whatever. But one day I was like, oh, when you said this one thing, it reminded me of this thing Edgar Casey talked about. It was like the soul journey, like the journey of the soul or something. And then they came back and told me that their parents said that Edgar Casey was a palm reader and that they're not allowed to come back to my house. And I was like, oops, I guess I kind of did the thing. But I was actually totally open minded. At this point, I was working at a store, so they were just coming by, and like no one else was there, so I was cool with it. But
I've been thinking about this lately, wondering if it's a matter of a lot of empaths have the opportunity to be able to see things from other people's perspective. So they have more of an opportunity to be able to entertain these very deep, hard topics for people to be able to comprehend, as far as like viewing it from another person's viewpoint. So, like,
right.
when it comes to religion, it seems like more often than not, the people I talk to that are more empathy
Hmm.
are easier with making that connectional barrier, because again, I think it's a matter of being an empath and that you have the ability to view things from other people's viewpoints, so you're able to break down your religious beliefs to actually understand somebody else's religious beliefs and perspectives on them.
Right. And like you can see like when it's coming from the heart, or I could also see when they're trying to literally use it to manipulate somebody to get something. So I'm like, I can tell when someone's really like believes what they believe, or if they're doing it from some like ego trip or something. But
That's the hard part about being an empath, though, is when they're really talking from the heart. It's like by the end of it, it's like you took in so much of their energy that you're
right.
just like you're like I'm converting right now, and then you start like coming down from the high, and then you're just like, wow, damn, I got really wrapped up and sucked up in that person's emotions. Holy crap!
So funny. I always kind of kid about how I can't get sucked into a cult because I've almost joined like all of them, but it's because I love all belief. I like to study all of them, but I've dabbled in so many cults at this point. Like I don't know if anybody could really convert me, but
But it's still a matter too of just like being curious of like the viewpoint though, because I think there's a lot
yeah,
of people that are in cults, and it's not that they're in the cult; they're just curious in like the viewpoint, you
right.
know?
Right. That's the thing. Like we don't have to fully like subscribe to everything or change our identity to
Those are always those guys that you're watching cult movies, and as soon as the killings start happening, they're the ones that start standing back in the corner. They're like, "All right, I was only here because I was curious."
right. I really like the way you guys dressed and
They got free Kool Aid, man. I was just coming for that, and we didn't even get to have that.
right. That's so funny. I was listening to something the other day, and this guy was talking about egregores. You know much about egregores?
I wow, refresh my mind. Like I know it, but like I'm just brain farting on it right now.
So he was talking about Santa Claus and basically how he's cool with like his kids are cool with knowing like Santa Claus isn't real because they know it's an egregore, which is basically when enough people believe in something, like it creates this like version of it, I guess maybe in like the fourth dimension or the collective unconscious.
It's
And
almost like a
so like,
tulpa, but not like a physical form of like a tulpa, right?
oh, I don't know. I don't know what that word means.
A tulpa is pretty much like so many people believe in something that they believe it into existence, which is like a lot of
Yes.
theories and like a lot of
Yes.
cryptids. But it's like physically in this reality versus like this being in the
Just in the
like
collective unconscious.
spiritual collective and not physically here, you know?
Right. Well, I was thinking, with some of these people that are just, if you could literally just make up a deity, right? Just pull, like put a bunch of archetypes together, make up a deity. And if enough people believe it, like it kind of becomes real in that way. Maybe
I mean,
not physically, but
thanks to the internet though, there's still some theoretical probabilities on it being a tulpa and being physically in this reality. Like,
right.
look at a lot of the creepy pasta stuff. There's a lot of people that claim, to have seen sightings of a lot of those things and have
Right.
had video evidence of a lot of them. And again, I'm one of those people that again, it's like hard for me to full blown like I believe in Sasquatch, but at the same time, it's like I don't know, like it's hard for me to throw like all my theories into one place. It's
Right. Right. I feel you. I was gonna ask about that.
that's a hard
So
question. If I had to have if somebody had like a gun to my head and they're like, is Sasquatch a real thing? I'd probably say yes. But
right.
as much as I do like want it to exist, like there's still like doubt in my mind, of course. But I feel like that's a healthy part of like entertaining any theory because if you're full blown like yes 100%, then you're gonna look at it from only that perspective and angle too. So like I have my way that I sway towards, but I'm never like 100% like yes or no if that makes sense.
Right. I get that. I totally get
I'm like
that.
90-10 Sasquatch.
I need to ask the records about Sasquatch. I had like the Fae. It was the Fae. So I guess that's like the fairy kingdom as my guide the other day. And I was like, well, I guess that means fairies are kind of real if they're in the records, like sending me this message. But I
See,
haven't
that's
asked
part of
about
that 10% though, is
right,
possible Fey interactions and that they're like
right.
not actually Sasquatch, but things projecting themselves as Sasquatch. That's part of that 10%. So I'm in that realm too. So
Oh, that is interesting. I never thought about that. I have heard that like the fairy or elemental realm, they don't like when humans dabble, because some people like do it for like play and like they're not serious and that they'll kind of mess with those people just to sort of freak them out so they'll leave them alone. But when I was reading about this, they said every now and then they'll like accept a human and like allow them to come a little further or explain things to them or whatever. But it's rare because they just don't like to mess with humans or something like that.
they just
But
take the children and raise them up for their own. All the humans on that realm are all raised from children. They're not taking adults because they got enough kids over there.
right. That's funny. So we kind of talked about it a little bit, but could you define like what a cryptid is for those who've never heard of it before?
I guess the best way to define the word is that it's an animal that people have a belief in that it exists, but it may not exist, possibly. Like cryptid is kind of a vague term, or when people think of it, they kind of think of like Sasquatch, the Loch Ness monster, things like that. But even just like a big cat existing in an area that it's not supposed to exist in would technically be like classified as a cryptid because it's not
Right.
believed by like mainstream science to exist there, but there's still people that hold a belief that it does exist there. So that's kind of where it's based on, is that it's not registered or like acknowledged that it lives somewhere, but there's still a lot of like evidence that people believe that it does live there.
Okay. Okay.
Undiscovered animals, another good way of possibly classifying it.
Right. Which I feel like they still discover animals all the time, especially some of the sea animals and stuff. So, I mean, I definitely
Even
don't
in
think we know
Indonesia, they
everything.
find all the cave systems that have like full ecosystems. They're always finding weird stuff in those.
Right. So there's no telling like what's living down there. If
Journey
the
to the center of the earth. There could be caverns everywhere with full of different life that's never touched any other life, and it's fully adapted by itself or formed by itself. Like, who knows?
right, I saw someone that was really deep in a cave not too long ago, and it literally had plants and stuff. Like, but there was no light source, so everyone was like, "How are there plants down here, like growing in the bottom of this cave when there's no light?" So I don't know. I feel like there's something going on there that we don't fully understand the inner Earth stuff at all.
I mean,
So
things adapt differently, of course, too. Like, I feel like there's a lack of something that they'll just need more of something else. So, I mean, at
right,
least as far as like a cave plant goes, maybe it uses less of sun energy and uses more water because assumably it's more
right,
humid down there and it sucks a lot more out of the air. Just like,
okay,
like animals
okay,
down there, where if there's no light, they never adapt to have eyes. So half those animals don't have eyes because there's never been a need for them. But because of that, they have different senses that help them get around. So, similarly with plants, if they're not getting it from somewhere, they're getting it from somewhere else. So they're taking something else in. Like even possibly maybe there's gas in the air that's created from like the rocks they're around, and maybe they take in extra something from that. Like there's
maybe,
always different weird possibilities.
yeah. So have you dabbled in like the hollow Earth theories and stuff?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. What do you think? Because like there's a part of me that really wants to believe in it. Like it just sounds so cool to me, but obviously there's no way to prove it and it could just all be like energetic, like project your consciousness into the center of the earth and you might see something, right? But what do you think?
I mean, there's two sides of it. There's the woo woo side of it, which is the side that, of course, is the more fun side, where there's possibly like Agarthia, like underworld
Yeah.
world civilizations, like the reptilians,
Yeah.
bunch of different weird stuff down there, possibly existing in different layers. There's all the Native American lore about them coming up from different layers and different beings coming from different layers. But then on the other side of it, if you don't want to believe in Hollow Earth as like that theory, even just
Mm-hmm.
in a simple term, you can look at it as there's guaranteed that there's caverns in the earth, there's different caves, and we always find random life in different caves there. So it may not be like this whole vast underground world with like evolved civilizations, but that
Right.
doesn't get rid of the possibility of it just being different caves and caverns where there's different life that exists. So it just kind of depends on how far into the spectrum you want to exist. Like, of course, I'd rather get into the beings being there.
Right, because that's
Than
fun.
like the green children of Woolpit. I don't know if you've ever dug into that story. Coming
No.
up from, they said, from the ground and having green skin in England. If you want to get into that, we could definitely get into that one too. But like,
Yeah.
it, I like to entertain the crazy theory as far as that goes. But no matter what, there is some form of a hollow earth, even if it's just
Right.
caves and caverns.
Right, exactly, exactly. I just did an episode not too long ago on Barbara Handclow's Alchemy of Nine Dimensions. I don't know if you've heard of her. But she went through the dimensions and 1D was the iron core crystal center, and it's basically like the storehouse of the Akashic records on Earth. But she said that every planet has its own core and its own records, and then all those records like connect. But it's just so interesting to think about it as now that I'm an Akashic record reader, like I'm tuning in and like my consciousness is actually going down versus like thinking about soaring out into the cosmos. I have to be extremely rooted in order to bring that information forward. But it's like maybe Hollow Earth is more about like when people are connecting to that core, they're getting information. And maybe they think, oh, there's beings there, right? Because where's this information coming from, right? But the
I mean,
records are kind of everywhere too. They exist in all dimensions. But it's that her theory is that that's like the database, like that's where it's stored for Earth.
I could definitely see that. I've always kind of questioned whether or not the Akashic records exist in water, just because, like, as people, we're primarily made up of water. So when
Right.
somebody passes away, that water goes somewhere and it reconnects into this consciousness that's the water that exists on Earth. So again, why people have like sparked ideas that happen in water, like just my theory on it. I almost wonder if it
Right.
is attached to water somehow. And I got into another deep conversation with people about it too. And she was talking about how you have like your earthly memories and then you
Uh-huh.
have like your important like spiritual memories, and
Hmm.
your consciousness of course like travels. So your like important memories are attached to that, which would be like your past lives, important traumatic events that have happened through those lives. And
Hmm.
all of your random earthly knowledge that you've learned isn't important to your, like spiritual self. So it just loses that and sheds that. And that's what kind of gets thrown into the Akashic records. And then all of your memories get stored like with your consciousness as you go. But again, just a theory, but I like any kind of entertaining things from all angles. But
Yeah. Well, the same woman, when she said she calls it an iron core crystal. Well, she says what it is, the iron in our blood actually resonates with the iron. And so it could theoretically be something about the iron within us that's actually like holding the memory and then connecting into this iron core crystal. So, I didn't learn that in like my Akasha class or anything. That's totally just a side thing that I've been just, pondering. But
just theorizing on that though, I mean, theoretically, if there is like a universal consciousness that everybody likes to believe in, that all consciousness is connected, maybe
mhm,
it's connected by planet where the planets themselves are conscious
yeah.
and they want to experience themselves. So
Mhm,
they project themselves as multiple consciousnesses on their surface in order to be able to experience themselves from a different view. And then looking at it from that angle, that could even come into like the extraterrestrials, different types of alien beings that they're a universal consciousness, but they're a different universal consciousness because maybe you resonate with your planet because you're actually the consciousness of that planet.
I
And
mean,
that's maybe why these like theoretical space traveling folk, are
mhm.
trying to find a new home, but they never find it, is because they never reconnect back to their universal consciousness because they're only the remnants left of it.
Oh, that's interesting. I definitely feel like planets do have some kind of consciousness. Um, and I also think that they store karma. And so that's why when we have these transits and it's like boom and things hit you in your life, well, it's like they're storing the karma. So as they're moving, and all this stuff is coming out, like, but everyone's karma is in it, if that makes sense. But like the transits affect us slightly differently depending on what house and things like that. But I think the planets and the records are sort of storing our karma and like helping it play out for our own best interest, so that we can work on the things that you gotta reap what you sow, I guess, in that way. But I do think that there's some like life hacks though. Like with the records, they have this forgiveness prayer, and it really does like I swear it neutralizes karmic bonds with people. So like, so there's been a couple people, I just didn't really love the way they treated me or things like that, and instead of just like being bitter, which I wanted to be bitter, but I just practiced this forgiveness, and I'm telling you, it's like everything about me just felt so immediately better. There was no like connection to them anymore. And I truly felt like they don't owe me anything. Like they don't have to say sorry. They don't have to come back in the next lifetime, to like pay the debt. I'm like, you're forgiven. Move the freak on. So, like, we
I've
do
always
have
seemed to
to pay it
notice
all
that
back.
the people like that are, they're
Mhm.
always like, there's something about them that like resonates with you and yourself. And
Right.
I feel like those people are always meant to come because they're supposed to make you have some kind of realization about yourself. And once you make that realization, that's when they seem to kind of just like, even if they're around, they're just not so like annoying or like attached to you, is because I don't, I feel like there's a lot more with like internal struggles than people realize. I feel
Yeah.
like it's a weird thing. There's so many moving components to it where everybody just has these different journeys and everything's supposed to clash at certain times,
Mhm.
and it's just like this overly complicated moving machine with so many different moving components to it that like if one machine piece moves out of any kind of issue, that it's just going to cause like a whole backlash across everything, that like
Mhm.
everybody's meant to touch at certain points because they're supposed to like benefit each other in some way in order to like progress them as a person.
Right. Right. I've definitely been thinking about people that are like the perpetrator, or like they're starting stuff. It seems like there's a like that's needed. So it's like is some of that before we even incarnate kind of known like okay, you're going to be the perpetrator in this life and you're going to shake me up until I realize something and then you're going to move on. So it's like we're all playing these roles for different people because we've all like been that perpetrator too. So it's like, is this though like all for our benefit at the end of the day? Like we're just sort of testing each other and then asking each other, okay, well, if you do the work, if you grow, then this won't annoy you anymore because it won't matter because you've done the work. So
I mean, even in the simplest terms, it could just be for the sake of entertainment of the universe because you can't have growth
right,
without struggle. You can't have good without
right.
evil. If it wasn't for all of that battle and all of that struggle, everything would just be neutral and nothing would happen. So, I mean, even if, just if the universe theoretically is trying to experience itself, if we're all connected in some way, shape, or form, it's kind of like twiddling your thumbs together. Like you want something to happen, you have to have something chasing the other thing. Otherwise, nothing's ever going to happen. Nothing's going to progress. Everything's just going to sit stagnant and be unentertaining.
Right. Yeah, for sure. For sure. So you do a lot of like the bizarre stories and stuff. What's the most bizarre story that you've heard?
Ooh, this is a hard one. Depends on which category you want to get into, I guess.
Okay,
I got some
those.
pretty interesting cryptid ones, and I got some pretty interesting UFO ones.
Okay. Oh, I'm like both of those sound good. So can we do both? Could you talk about the cryptids and the UFOs?
Well, do you want stories that I've dug into, or do you want specific stories that I've talked to people about that they've experienced? Just to break it
Um,
down a little bit more.
let's do what you've dug into. That way, you know quite a bit about it. So
So as far as cryptid stuff goes, let's see. The most interesting thing for me, at least, that I've dug into, and I just have a lot of question. And I mean, there's a lot. I've dug into the Michigan Dogman just because I feel like not a lot of people do it, and me being like a Michigander, I feel like I just
right.
kind of want to do it. There's a lot of weirdness based around that. Like two of the most convincing things that I've seen and read and experienced about is the first one was at a factory in, I believe it was Cadillac. I'd have to look at my notes again, but it was in the 1960s. And essentially, there was this guy who'd work in night security for this factory. So they gave him like a house on the property. And he used to like sit on the porch every night and just like watch over like the factory property, make sure everything was good and safe. And he was seeing this thing moving off in like the shadows, and he was trying to get a good image of it. And his son came out, and he told his son to go get his camera, and he ended up snapping a picture of this thing, and he described it as like a bipedal canine, and he has a picture of it like hiding behind a pole. Like I recently posted on the Instagram, but just like all the weirdness around that, and he had the picture analyzed a bunch of times, and there hasn't really been any like but he really like out in the forefront, like proving it is like false. It just brings a lot of like question to it for me at least.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one that I've kind of been digging into myself, and I don't hear a lot of people talk about, is this weird OnStar call from Troy, Michigan in 2007, where basically it's somebody that gets into a car accident because something ran across the road, and they're talking to the OnStar call person, and the OnStar call person, is doing the normal like questioning them, and in the process of that, something charges the car. You hear it hit the car, you hear some screaming, and then the phone cuts out. And like again, you don't hear a lot talking about it. The only information I could find on it is that it happened in Troy in 2006, and it was an OnStar call. And then directly after it, there was this like Halloween release that GM did as like a fake werewolf attack OnStar call. And there's just a lot of like weird cover up stuff with it. And when I first found it, I was having to like clip chase it, where it was like I'd find it and then that page would get deleted. I'd find it and then that page would get deleted. And I finally got annoyed at doing that, so I recorded it myself, and I have my own audio saved on the computer of it now. But I've been chasing this call, trying to get more information on it, and
Mm-hmm.
it's been like a year of me digging up on it. And I haven't found any more information on it other than Troy 2006, where again, it's two sides of the coin. That either one, there's no information on it, so it could be completely staged, or two, there's no information on it because it's being scrubbed because it's a real call
Right.
and they're trying their best efforts to hide it. Because when it comes to the dogmen stuff, I can get into all my theories about that stuff, but like there's a huge component of government cover up with a lot of people that have experiences with these things or see these things. And again, it can go two sides of the spectrum, where they're something that the government is using for their advantage, or it's just something that the government's trying to keep tabs on because they don't know. It's one of those things. If there's a problem, you don't tell everybody directly. You try to keep it in the quiet as much as you can until you can't handle it anymore. And then once you can't handle it anymore, then you kind of just, oh, I don't know where it came from.
Right. But like play like you don't know anything. I feel like that's kind of how they are with like the UFOs right now. Like now they're like, release the UFOs. We're gonna accept them now, suddenly. But
I still think that was a ploy that they were
yeah.
two things. I have a couple different theories on that. The main one of the main ones is that it's going to be a Cold War with China, where it's just this matter of back and forth, sending balloons, sending whatever, and everybody's scared of war being imminent, but nothing actually happens. Just the
Right.
standstill of spies and security.
Right.
Option two, the U.S. was just trying to blow something up and call it a UFO so that in the future, if weird things are flying over, they can
Right.
just shoot at it and shoot it down. And people are just going to go, oh, it was just a spy balloon instead of
Right.
actually looking at it as like extraterrestrial. Cause I think they purposely use the term UFO for these because they want to get rid of the stamina with that term. And that's
Right.
why they use like UAPs in different terms when they're talking about them seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And because why would they change the term and be talking about it constantly? And then when it comes to this in particular, they start using UFOs. Like
Right.
it's trying to,
Right.
I feel like more so than anything, it's trying to pull people away. And if I had to
Right.
guess, it's so that if there is weird stuff in the future, people aren't going to question it. They're just going to assume it's just, you know, like something from another country or somebody's like ham radio balloon.
Right.
Just gives them more opportunity to be able to cover it up.
Right. Right. Well, as someone that loves like UFO stories and all that, when it was on the news, I was like, no. Now if they're the ones that are releasing this, I don't believe it. I'll believe the random guy on the in the farm with the cows or whatever, but I'm not gonna believe this newscaster.
That's where I'm at too. If there's a mainstream that's putting it out, like that's been looked over by so many people that they know exactly what they're using. They purposefully use certain terminology for things. They'll
Mm-hmm.
purposely use certain words so that people will start feeling a certain way when they're talking about certain topics. Like there's so much psychology put into the news, it's ridiculous, and people just look right past it.
Yeah. Well, I hate it because I noticed it and I'm like, oh, why do they gotta do that? Why can't there be like a neutral thing? But the only neutral information you can get, I basically think is like podcasts and stuff like that, where it's just regular people. There's no incentive. We're not like selling something. We're not trying to manipulate you to like we're just talking. So
And that's why a lot of those people are trying to start podcasts. Like they have all the CNN podcasts, the NPR podcasts, and they all fail is because nobody wants to listen to that shit. They want real people having real conversations with no agenda telling their truths.
exactly.
And
Exactly.
you have more room for error where like you can make theories on things on a
Mhm.
podcast and people aren't going to hold you to it like they are the mainstream news because again they'd rather have just like that raw opinion rather than something that's been filtered to make them feel a certain way.
So with the UFOs, um, what kind of stories have you heard on that? Do you look up like Stephen Greer and the CE5 stuff? Have you heard of that?
I dig around. I mean, my main thing that I dig into more often than not is like folklore and cryptids and stuff. I do dig into a lot of the UFO stuff, and I do have like a lot of like UFO experiencers on the show because I definitely love talking to those people.
Yeah.
Um, I say the biggest one when it comes to like weird topics to talk about with the UFO phenomenon is like the whole 20 and back thing. Like I've gotten to talk to two people who've done 20 and backs, and when it comes to the UFO phenomenon, that's definitely like my biggest interest is just the whole concept of that and the connection with that being between government and extraterrestrials, just a
Mhm.
deep, weird rabbit hole. And everybody that's experienced it, they're so like you can listen to people tell stories and tell encounters and tell whatever, and you can tell sincerity in people's voices. And everybody that I've talked to about 20 and backs, they don't have any weirdness to the way they tell the story. Like they know what they're saying and they tell it definitely. And that's again what brings a lot of like question to it in my mind of like when it comes to those experiences, I feel like the 20 and back people are the ones that are the most like set in stone on what happened to them.
Right. So what is the 20 and back all about? I don't think I've heard of that one.
So the concept of it is pretty much that they pick you at a certain point in your life, usually when it's like younger kids, depending on what they're trying to use them for, or sometimes they're a little bit older, but they'll take you from this point in your life, then you'll live 20 years on this like separate timeline almost, where like a lot of those people will be out doing like space missions or they'll be in contact with like different races, or even some of them will be used as like government like sex slaves and just weird stuff like that And then after the 20 years, they'll get put back into that spot that they were in originally at that same age. And they'll have this weird thing where they'll try to have wiped the memories. Like more often than not, these people have to do like regression. But the reason that they realize they have to do regression is because they have all this like subconscious stuff built up. Like I talked to one guy and he was saying that he was 10 years old and he was attracted to 30-year-old women and he didn't understand why. And then he started realizing that there was still something like that happened in the back of his mind that made him feel this certain way and why he was like feeling adult emotions. And I got into this whole deep concept with him about how you could theoretically erase forefront memories, but you couldn't erase like subconscious memories because it's like intuned into you and yourself. That, you
Right.
know, if you grow to be 30 years old and you're attracted to 30-year-old women, then it's hard for you to go back to being attracted to like a 9-year-old because that's it's not physically in you anymore because it can't be erased from your subconscious because that's part of you, like your programming at that point now. Like it's really weird and deep. Like I could go on 20 and back tangents for
Right.
hours, but the
That's
one guy I
awesome.
talked to, he was a government sex slave. And then after that, he got pushed onto basically being somebody that was almost like a mechanic for like the ships and everything on the Ceres colony, which is, he was saying, was just beyond like Mars. And
Hmm.
then the other person I talked to was ex-military, and he was saying that after his 20 back experiences, he actually like was pushed into joining the military, and they were purposely putting him in like certain scenarios that if there was like a traumatic moment that happened during his 20 and back, they would get him pushed into a certain like situation that would be very similar to the 20 and back so that they could almost like connect the memories where it would confuse him in his head of when he'd start having regression of the 20 and back, he would associate it with this normal military memory and it would just make it like a harder PTSD like regression. And it's just his all of his experiences were all like military based and the other guys were all, like I said, the sex slave when he was younger, and then when he got older he was like a mechanic working on like different ships. And it was
Right.
just like weird stuff that he was talking about, these geysers that were happening on a different planet. I don't remember the exact planet he was talking about, but it was when he was about to drop his book and NASA was talking about him and saying that they didn't know what was creating him, and he was saying no, those are sodium. He's like, we flow past them. That was one of the things that they would let us do for entertainment was see these geysers go off, and he's like, it's sodium. And he said his publisher was like, if you're wrong about this, it throws your whole story out the window. And he's like, I'm not wrong. Like I saw this, it's sodium.
Right.
And then he said 2 weeks after that, NASA released that it was sodium, and he was like, "You gonna believe me now?"
Right. Right. Wow. That brought up for me this story I heard on Coast to Coast a long time ago that I've never been able to forget because it was like, whoa. It was called Project Pegasus. Have you ever heard of that?
Yes.
Where they're like send these kids back in time and like they're like changing like little details and that's like part of why like the Mandela effect and stuff occurs and
See, I was
um
thinking even just like off of a lot of stuff that they tried to do, I almost wonder if timelines. I was talking to somebody else about this. His name is Brian. Shout out to Brian. He was talking about how when a timeline has been altered so many times, how it's almost like if you break a piece of glass and try to put it back together with glue, there's always still going to be the cracks in it. And those cracks are what start creating these weird ripples and start to have different realities start to converge into the one reality. It's because it was never put back in the same structure again. And
right,
then my theory on it is just that once you start messing with reality and time, that those different timelines might start to converge at certain points. And that's where we have all this like weird back and forth. Or once you open up a doorway into another reality, then you have this supposed possible constant interchange of people between those two realities once the void's been opened. And people could be walking through a time slip back and forth between two realities, but they're directly next to each other and so similar, besides these little subtle differences, that you could be time slipping back and forth between them constantly and not even realize which one you're in until you start asking people about, like, oh, what's the line from this movie? What's this from this? What's this
right,
from this? And then
right.
just another weird one to throw in there. And I'm not going to say it's going to go for every single one, but I still think that there's a good portion of Mandela effects that are testing to see how much information you can change on the internet, and people are just going to believe it off of a
Right,
Google search because
right,
it could just be a forefront for possibly in a couple generations being able to change historical events. And all you have to do is change it on the internet, and then everybody refers to the internet instead of books nowadays. and
Right.
you could essentially change history just off of rewriting some shit on the internet. But you got to start somewhere. You got to be subtle with it and then start building up. You got to test it.
Um, I never even thought about that. Oh my goodness. Yeah, the Project Pegasus was like government too. I think that's what it kind of triggered it, which it was like the guy that did this particular interview was one of the kids that did it, and his dad was one of the scientists. And his particular theme was to multiple times they sent him back to the day that Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. And he would go and it would like slightly change each time, and he would come back and tell them, the things that had changed. So it was like something about them. So it's interesting with that 20 thing that you're saying too, because it's like children, but there was something about like adults, like their consciousness is already so like, set like that they couldn't go back. But these kids that didn't even know like who Abraham Lincoln was, like they're sending them, and it's like they're not projecting anything onto it. They're just like observing what they see and then they're coming back. But
Yeah, they're
I
not
don't know.
like fully manifested in this reality. Kids are kind of like walking in between two until they get planted in this reality from society telling them like this is how to feel, this is how it is. Don't do this, don't do that. Then you
Right.
get rooted.
Exactly. So it's so interesting that both of those involve like children and like having that like innocence, and I don't know, that's so interesting. I've just never been able to forget that. And I think that might have been when I first started thinking of like timelines and like how this one thing could be different somewhere else. And every now and then, this probably sounds really far out, I'll feel like there's a version of me that died. Like I'll literally be like, and I'll be like, oh my God. But I don't know. It's like on some level, on some other plane, I think I might have just died. I can't explain why I feel that way, but
I always wonder that when you get those moments of like you're about to do something and then you see like an image of yourself dying before you do it, and then
right,
you're just like, all right, I'm gonna do this instead. And you never see like a car accident or anything happen, but you just like
right,
envision it in your head, and it almost makes you wonder if like in a different reality, like
yeah.
that theoretically happened.
Right. I think that way. I don't know. I'm probably like too open minded when it comes to timelines, but I think there's something to that.
I mean, for me, for timelines, at least how I rationalize it in my head, I don't think you can change the past because I feel like it's the past, so it's already happened. Even if you go back in the future, like even if you go back to the 1800s, like 30 years from now, like it's already happened back in the 1800s. So where we are currently in this time, it's already happened. It doesn't matter if that person hasn't gone back yet. I think everything's you can't change stuff that's happened in the past because you going back and changing stuff in the past is part of the past happening. But when you
Right.
start getting into this concept of like timelines and trying to hop timelines, then I
Mm-hmm.
think that that's where you start getting this like weird converging where you have like the Mandela effect and stuff. And it's not that the Mandela effect is happening because people are changing things in the past. It's because they're converging timelines and trying to hop timelines. And it's not because everything that's happened in the past has already happened. Like, I don't think that whole like grandfather thing happens where if you go back in time and you step on a bug, it's going to drastically change history. Because I think that you stepping on that bug already happened in the timeline that you're in. And that's why you're in that
Right.
timeline already.
Right. Like, so even when you think of like simultaneous time, which is something I've been trying to ponder on, for you, it's still in the past, even if it is all happening at the same time. But on your particular timeline, it is the past, even though it might be their future.
Mm-hmm.
So, have you heard of simultaneous time? Like Dolores Cannon talks about it a little bit.
Um, I mean, I get into some weird like time theories and stuff. I mean, if you want to refresh my mind on that one in particular, but when it comes to like simultaneous time, like I don't know, time's a weird concept. It's just kind of made up by people to begin with, and I
Right.
mean, everything could all be happening all at one place
Mm-hmm.
at one time, and it's just a matter of like your perspective of
Right.
where
Where
you
you're at,
are.
right? Where you're perceiving it from. Yeah.
So I've
So
gotten into
with,
this whole idea about theoretical time travel through like light spectrum and frequency because you hear about like in biblical times they did talk about blues. So I would like question if there's like a color spectrum for each period of time as we perceive it. Like maybe there's a color that a different generation talks about that we don't perceive in our time because we're in that color. And when it's almost like a smell, when you're constantly sitting in a smell, you stop smelling it. Same with that light spectrum. And then when it comes to like matching up your frequency, that's how you'd be able to like hear that time spectrum. So it's a matter of like visually lining up and then like verbally lining up or auditorily lining up, however you want to word that. Because then that would explain why people will hear like weird voices and like ghostly weird things. It may not be that it's a ghost around you or anything like that. You might be hearing something that happened at a different point in time because maybe for some weird reason, like that frequency lined up because you were just in the right place at the right time.
Right. And had the right thought that aligned with that particular frequency. But yeah, Dolores Cannon with simultaneous time. So I learned this. She wrote a book not on Nostradamus, but with Nostradamus. And supposedly he was still in France at the time that she was like she wasn't channeling it. So she would put people in hypnosis and then they would talk, right? And she discovered that like people that didn't know who Nostradamus was, people that had never been hypnotized or anything, right? And it didn't have to be the same person. So like four different people, when she was regressing them, at the end of their regression, they would talk to Dolores directly and be like, I am Nostradamus. I'm ready to write this book with you or whatever. But it was coming through different people at the end of different readings. And he specifically said, I'm here right now. Like I'm alive. It's this time period. We're still here. And then he was pulling this information through. It was just, I mean, I'm not saying that's 100% true or anything, but like when I heard that, like something lit up in me, because I've done a lot of past life regressions and things like that. And like when I'm there, like it's so real. Like I'm not saying like I'm physically there, but I'm so aware that I can like read pamphlets that's laying on a desk. I can open a drawer and look inside. Um, Talking to people is a little fuzzy. Okay, like so interacting with other people, like I can, but it's a little fuzzy. But as far as like observing things, like it feels real. But I'm always wondering, I'm like, is it real? Because like it's actually there, and then I'm like projecting, like my astral body there. Not my physical body, but how can I go there if it's not real? So I feel like it's in some way it's like stored. Like so even if it doesn't exist, it's like stored in the collective unconscious maybe. And like so I'm able to like find a loophole and to go there. But I don't know. It's really cool, but I'm still dabbling on that theory.
That almost makes you wonder though that if there is like a universal consciousness and it is just trying to experience itself, if it can just like change the base of knowledge whenever it wants to so that it can like make things more interesting or like change it up. And then that's where that kind of comes from is that they can change things that have happened in the past as far as like memories go for stuff that's happening now. So it's like maybe Nostradamus or whatever, all these people never like physically existed, but it put this memory of this person into everybody's thoughts and universal consciousness. So that person exists through everybody, but it doesn't mean that they necessarily ever like physically existed because we have no way of like going back and tangibly touching that person and saying like they're physically were here at any point.
Right, right.
Because I was talking about scrubbing the internet. If there's like a universal consciousness, I mean, we're all connected to it. It could change a memory and it would instantly change in everybody's head. Nobody would know none of the difference. I mean, it could even change memories between people too, because it's like I feel like you'll just hear like certain things where two people will have like a story and they'll have like fine-tuned details of that story, and then there'll be a third friend that was involved in the story, and the third friend will be like, that never happened, but the other two friends were so like in tune with the details that it just causes this weird confusion. Maybe it was just like a glitch in the system that the universal consciousness updated the memory for these two but forgot to do it for that one.
Maybe. I was talking to my therapist actually the other day about gaslighting, and I was like, do these people really believe that these things did not happen? Like that I was there, I saw it myself. I'm trying to say, this was the thing, and they're trying to say that that didn't happen. And she actually does think that there's certain things that can occur to where they like completely have blocked it out and they honestly do not believe that it happened. And I'm like, well, how is that? How can you say that this thing that definitely happened didn't? But if they don't believe it, like you just have to trust that, you were there, you saw it, and you just, you don't need them to validate it. But it just feels weird, like that there could potentially be people out there that don't remember like important things that they've done.
What
like
one
to
of the
where from
craziest ones that I've ever heard is the people that full well believe that the Holocaust never happened. Like,
right.
what?
Right, that's like Man in the High Castle, where it's like all these different like this is what reality would look like if the Nazis won or if they didn't, and then there's all these timelines. Have you seen Man in the High Castle?
I don't think I have.
You would probably love it. It's one of my favorite shows just because it helps stretch my mind to like what would that look like, and the acting's incredible too. But yeah, the whole concept of the show is like that the Nazis won the war and this is what it looks like. But then they discover these films in the show, and the films are actually showing like America winning the war. And these people are like, well, how could this happen? Like but like it instills this hope that like there's this other reality and that like there's this place where like the Nazis didn't take over. And then at some point there's actually people that have traveled between the timelines, that have come back and like actually existed in that world. Or there's one character that can astral project into the other world. But it is so cool as far as just like seeing how that would look, in a like a show format. So
I mean, you put that into the consciousness too, and it almost makes you wonder. It's like it's always good to question everything and look at things from an open-minded perspective, but to a certain extent, it's like they don't want that. So of course they're gonna put ploys out. They're just gonna make things sound absolutely fucking crazy. So it's like there's a lot of history that's clearly been covered up. There's a lot of weird history that doesn't make sense.
mm-hmm.
So what's the best way to make it so that that whole idea gets looked at like it's absolutely crazy? You throw in other concepts that are just ridiculous, like Holocaust
Right.
not denying, or
Right.
even just like I don't want to state any of like my side opinion on it, but like the whole like um Tartaria idea that like an entire civilization could be covered up. Like maybe people were onto something, and that's why they started throwing all these other things out. Or maybe Agartha, or not Agartha, but Tartaria was the ploy that they threw out because they were covering up things like stuff that was happening in Egypt and different shit like
Right.
that. And I mean, even getting into the flat Earth thing, like I have different viewpoints and theories on that, but that could have been an intentional ploy to just start infighting between people arguing whether or not the Earth is a globe or flat, instead of
Mm-hmm.
actually arguing about the fact that NASA's been lying to us. Or
Right.
again, just to throw in another weird theory that I like to throw at people and they ask me if I'm a flat earther or a globe earther. I always say if we live in an organic simulation of some sort, the map could have been updated where back in biblical times it was a flat map because that was all that was needed. It was just the basic original map. But as things have expanded, they've upgraded the map and now we have a globe. So maybe everybody is right if we're in an organic simulation. I'll just hit them out of left field with it.
Well, this is interesting you brought that up because I actually asked the Akashic Records not too long ago about what is going on with everyone, perceiving the earth a certain way. But, they were saying like with the flat earth that it's when you're looking at it from a two-dimensional lens, that it's that person's perspective that's actually projecting flat. And so for them, if that's true for them, then it is true for them. And same with the spherical. Like if you're projecting spherical, like and you really believe that, then it's true for you. But it was basically saying that you see it based on like who you are, right? So if your consciousness is more three-dimensional, you're going to see it spherical. But some people can see it like a spiralic, and then some people see it like sort of like a tetrahedron, so different like intuitives like actually see it like energetically a certain way. So if you were looking at Earth from like the fifth dimension, it might not look like a sphere. It might look like something totally different. So it's actually wherever your consciousness is like you'll perceive like the shape differently. So I was like, that's a very interesting way to explain that, where it's sort of like there's no wrong answer, but it's like they want us to sit here and argue about it. I think, it's like there's something about it, like, because I've seen it's like hostile. Like people argue like it's flat, it's spherical, it's flat, and like they're so upset about, their theory being wrong or whatever. But I just feel like, we talk about it, but we don't like it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, that doesn't matter. But what you said that there have been lies, in NASA. So that's the thing, is like I do think that there's other things that they have lied about or like covered up or whatever. And so people just don't trust them anymore. So throwing out whatever theory you want, someone's going to like cling to that because there's just like distrust in general. So they're like, well, they probably lied about this too, you know?
I said nobody's looking at NASA because they're too busy arguing with each other about the shape of the Earth. I don't know, just the whole like flat Earth. I like the way you explained it because then it almost kind of goes into like an interdimensional concept too. That it's just a matter of perspective and where you are like existing in the universe. That I mean, it could be it's directly linked to consciousness, or maybe people are perceiving the world in different forms, and it's a lot deeper than you even realize. Where maybe the only form that we're noticing is that it's like a flat Earth versus globe Earth. But if we actually start like putting more details together, maybe we realize that they actually do perceive the world totally differently.
Right.
And I mean, expanding up from there, I'm kind of curious, like what the perspective of the world is like going up. Like maybe those are the people that are like mediums and they're like starting to see stuff, and maybe they're not even fully into the next dimensional idea or perspective of what the Earth or reality is to begin with. And I mean, even expanding on that too, they say we only see 7% of the light spectrum. I mean,
Right.
it could be an expansion of that too, where it's almost like having multiple lights behind something. And if you only are able to see one light, you're only looking at it from one perspective. But as you illuminate it with more lights, you have more of an idea of what the shape is of it because there's more components coming into it.
Right. Right. I think there's definitely something to that. And just thinking of it that way, I feel like it brings peace though between everybody because it's like, well, I'll meet you where you're at.
Just hit them with Hollow Earth. Say you're a Hollow Earther because then it could work for both.
I know I actually love throwing in Hollow Earth when someone really wants me to convert to Flat Earth, but I just let people talk. I'm like, I'm interested, in the concepts and stuff. So
I'll
it's
entertain
just
the theories all day. I love it, but
right. It's just when they're like mean about it. Like I was listening to one podcast and the dude was like, spherical earth people are idiot, and you're just like, okay, okay, we don't have to we don't have to do that, but I guess they just really want to they want it to be real for everybody, right? Which is it's fine if that's their desire.
I mean, looking at it from a weird perspective too, everybody looks at it like we have our construct of what the solar system looks like. But again, it's just a matter of like 1 point perspective where, we don't think we're the center of anything, but even theoretically, we could be the absolute center of everything. But the matter is that, we're in the moving car and we're watching the world move around us and we think we're moving with it. But realistically, like we could be the standing point and the world's moving around us, or not the world, but the universe is moving around us.
Right.
I don't know, just a weird perspective of looking at it. Like, and if
Mhm.
that's true, maybe we are the center of everything, and then that kind of goes back into that whole idea of organic simulation, where both theories could possibly be true. Because if I had to guess the construct of the universe, I would assume that it's some type of created thing by I don't want to say necessarily a higher power, but something that was more intelligent than us before it. Because we're kind of moving into that extent where we're creating virtual reality, and what happens one day when we want to play video games, we want to be so realistic that the characters inside the video games, we start programming them to just do whatever they want, and then all of a sudden they start becoming conscious. Then we've essentially created a universe inside of our universe. And
Right.
again, that kind of expands back to the idea that the map was originally this, and as the map expanded, everything started becoming more. And even with the planets, maybe the reason we can't get a good visual on most planets is because they haven't been fully rendered until you are actually there, like in a video game.
Right.
You're just looking at it from like across the map where you're seeing the basic outlines and shapes, but it doesn't actually fully render until you're there. And then that
Right.
again could explain all the weird phenomenon that happens with ghosts, Sasquatch, uh, the Fae, anything. Is
Right.
that we're all the characters that are inside the game, and whatever's outside of it is that's all their playable characters. That's when they want to come in and play the game. That's what they play as, and the rest of the time we're just all the GTA characters walking around the city.
Right? Like just not paying no attention until we see, some weird thing in the sky or some figure that we can't describe. Yeah. I think with cryptids, so the same book that talked about the records being the crystal core center or whatever, it talks about the fourth dimension, and it talks about like that's where like a lot of the beings, the imaginary beings, the ghost and things like that exist. And so we're multidimensional beings. So we're actually in and out of these according to this book. We're in and out of these dimensions all the time. So if your consciousness just happens to slip in fourth dimension, if you're dissociating or something like that, you're in the fourth dimension. So if you're in that headspace and Sasquatch walks by, you might see it because your consciousness is more in the fourth dimension when you dissociate. Or when you're dreaming and things like that, that's more of the fourth dimension. So I feel like it's like they're slipping through and we're perceiving them because our dimensions are stacked and we're really not that separate. Like 4D is very close to 3D. Um, I don't know. I just feel like they're kind of like they're actually in their dimension, but we are somehow accidentally slipping into that dimension too. And so we're seeing them. And then we come back to 3D and we're like, okay, what happened? It's gone now. I've never seen anything like that, but I feel like they are kind of interdimensional.
I have a lot of ideas that I entertain as far as Sasquatch goes, but one thing that I do bring up often is people always talking about time slip stories and them walking through time slips. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, this I always question if that's possible for other things that exist in other places.
Mm-hmm.
And if those time slips never corrected themselves, then a breeding population starts here. Where again, maybe Sasquatch could be something that's always been here, something physical.
Right.
That's one idea that I definitely like to entertain. That's where like my logical mind goes.
Yeah.
But as far as like the woo woo mind goes, I definitely think that there could be an interdimensional component to them, but I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if they're necessarily intentionally interdimensional. Like I said, like
Right.
the same kind of concept as like people walking through time slips.
Right. Right. I don't know if they're doing it, as much as it might be us seeing that. You know what I mean? I don't know if they're always
Because
seeing
like,
us.
why would you want to come into a reality where everybody like looks at you like a monster? Like it doesn't make any sense why you do it intentionally, you know?
Right. Right. I could see that for sure.
Especially if you're an intelligent enough being to possess the capability to be able to interdimensionally walk.
Right. Right. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Um, so I've been having a lot of people reach out about wanting to start a podcast and stuff. Do you have any like encouraging words of wisdom for people that are right at the edge of feeling confident enough to hit the go button on podcasting?
Best advice is don't get caught up on hearing your own voice. Just kind of look past it and you'll get more comfortable as you go through. And kind of like I was saying in the beginning of the show, like go in with kind of like an idea of what you want to do, but
Mhm.
let your show take shape into where it's going to go. Because if you hold it into that box, then it's never going to become what it's potentially capable of. And anybody that you ask that's been doing a podcast for a while, they usually talk about how like the podcast becomes you. And that kind of converges like both ways that like you become a podcaster, but at the same time, your podcast becomes you. And if you don't give it the opportunity to really like characterize and become you, then it's never really going to grow where it needs to grow. And it's never going to be that organic podcast that you want.
Mhm.
And, don't hop in expecting to get thousands of listeners right off the bat. Like,
Mhm.
do it because it's something that you want to do. Don't go into it with the intentions of becoming like a famous person or like a personality or being like a famous show. Like, do it for the right reasons and then it'll grow as it needs to grow. And don't like be constantly checking numbers, comparing yourself to other people. Like, let you do your thing, let yourself grow, find some people that you're comfortable asking questions to, and more often than not, if there's anybody that's in the podcast universe, like they're gonna help, they're gonna be willing to help you out. There might be some bad eggs along the way, but you know, look past them because there's bad eggs in every group, of course. But yeah, just start your show with pure intentions. Do it for you. Don't do it with the intention of being something huge. And just inner work, make friends, make community. Like that's at the end of the day, kind of like what it's all about. And
Mhm.
don't get too caught up on again, like your voice, because I feel like that's a really hard thing for people, especially when they're first starting, is they
Mhm.
hate the way their voice sounds recorded. But as you start going, like you'll get more comfortable. You'll hear it as you go through your episodes. Like you just have to bite the bullet and get past it and get into your comfort spot because your first probably 10, 15 episodes are going to be awkward, but it's expected. So get past that awkward point, kind of like, growing your hair long. You got to get past the awkward phase to get into the
Right.
fun phase. So just keep gunning at it, keep doing it, um, and get out of your comfort zone because that's honestly part of it, I feel.
Right. That's where the courage kind of comes in is like, okay, I don't know. I don't really know where this is going to go. I don't know all the answers, but like I have that desire and I know I'm supposed to pursue this. So,
It's one of those things that you'll make it work as things come. That there's always going to be problems. There's always going to be things that pop up. That's never a reason to quit. It's more of a reason to figure out how to get past that. And then if it pops up again in the future, then you know how to deal with it. Because I see a lot of people that'll start a podcast and they'll fall into some kind of like weird tech issue or something will happen and they'll
Hmm.
be like, fuck it. And they'll just throw the whole thing out. It's like,
Right.
you have to have that push to get past that because it's guaranteed going to happen. It's a matter of wanting, again, to have that passion to do it, that
Hmm.
you're going to see it as an obstacle rather than like a blocking wall or like an end final wall.
Right. Yeah, I definitely think the tech, like probably like 80% of the time is why people don't do it. It's because they're scared of buying the wrong thing and it not being what they need, or, that it's going to mess up on them or whatever. But you just have to, Google or reach out and ask people like, okay, what did you get? What works for you? And luckily my husband's great with tech. So I got really, really lucky because he like I'll write the edits and he cuts them for me. And like he created my intro and like made sure the music was like free domain or whatever. So I wouldn't get flagged for that. There was all these things that I wouldn't have considered that he thought about, and it really helped. But I've been trying to help some people here and there too, but it really is just allow yourself to make some mistakes too. Like if you buy the wrong thing, send it back, right? Buy another thing. Like it
Don't be scared to ask. That's half of being like a podcaster is that like,
right.
don't be scared to ask somebody to come on your show because the worst thing they can say is no. That's a huge thing I hear at the begin with people when they first start is they're scared to ask people to come on the show.
Hmm.
Again, worst they can say is no. Don't be afraid to ask people things. And that same goes for advice. Like if you don't know how to do something, there will be somebody out there that'll help you. And again, it's a matter of half of being a podcaster is not being scared to ask questions. So don't be scared to ask other podcasters for advice because more often than not, there's somebody that'll help you out or at least know something about it.
Right. Send you like a picture of their setup or whatever. Yeah, I still get nervous, like I have a couple people I'm like right on the edge of asking. I'm like, I just don't know. I just don't know if they'll come on, but they're definitely like no one's gonna be a jerk about it or anything. They might just be like, I don't do podcasts.
Or like the worst that I've gotten is just people that'll say like, "Oh, like I'm busy with like I've never gotten a rude response from anybody. Like anybody that is a serious guest that you're trying to have on your show, if they're like a researcher, author, writer, whatever, like they want to remain professional and seem professional. So they're not going to come at you with like a fuck you, you're a little show or something like that. Like they're gonna
Right.
if they say no, they're gonna let you down easy. Nobody's ever rudely said no about coming on the show. They always it's oh, I have this work that's coming up. There's this, there's that. Like,
Right.
there's stuff that's definitely excuses, but nobody's gonna hit you with a hard like, no, like, why would I ever do that?
Right, right. And I'm to the point where I haven't really reached out much. It's just like people ask me, and I love being at that point because I don't have to hit that wall of like, what if they say no? But there is a point where people will find you too. And then so it's like half the work is done because the community is like kind of sustainable. It's like self-sustaining. So it's like, oh, well, people want to come on the show because then they can share their wisdom or advertise their thing or whatever. So it's kind of cool for me that it's gotten to that point where I'm like, I don't have to stress about like, oh, I need another guest like tomorrow. I really I really like my podcast for the fact that I interview people that aren't, sometimes never on podcasts, might never be on another podcast, right? They just have the wisdom, they have the story, and they come on. Like, they're not necessarily trying to get famous or they're not already like some big name. So, like, some of these really big podcasts, they're interviewing these huge names, but these people get interviewed all the time, so their stories documented. But I try to like get people on that have never, told their story or that have something to say, but like they don't have the platform or they're like older and don't know the tech or whatever. But it's really cool because I'm able to document these stories that might never get documented. So these people might pass on, but this episode will still exist. So,
That's kind of where I like to go sometimes too. I like to have a lot of like first time authors or like, fresh
mhm,
authors on. I like having a lot of like researchers, of course, like wide spectrum, like bigger researchers, but a lot of smaller researchers too. Um, but even just like the way I kind of conduct my show is that I might purposely listen to like two or three interviews that somebody that I'm going to have on spent on. But the reason I do that is so that I can bring them into a different realm because I'll hear this person do the same interview three times. So when I have on my show, I leave it open as like the open minded conversation, like I said, because if I start asking them questions about themselves and they seem to get really excited about something, then I'll go down that avenue. And then by the
Right.
end, I try to make it a fun interview for the guests instead of them having to repeat the same stuff. Like Giants of Ancient America, I had on my show recently, and he's always talking about, again, Giants of Ancient America. And we are talking before the show about how he also likes doing a lot of like Sasquatch research. So as
Mm-hmm.
soon as we got onto the show, we of course talked about giants, and then we got into his Sasquatch research, and then we started connecting dots between his Sasquatch research and his giant research.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fun just to give people the opportunity that everybody has this idea of like what this person's coming on the show to talk about. And what I try to do purposely with my show is, even if it's somebody that's been on a bunch of other shows, like I want to do a totally different interview than anybody else has done with that person. And I try to find what the person gets the most excited about to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And even if it's not their main thing they talk about, if it's something that they get really passionate about, like I take that opportunity to dig right into that and give them like their platform to do it. Because even like a guest, if you bring on somebody that's known for talking about this, they're going to they're going to think that you're expecting them to talk about that. So when you give them
Right.
that doorway to go into something else, like it just, you never know what you might get into. Like that's some of the best part about podcasting is
Yeah.
trying to get people into different methods of thinking than they normally are. And that's kind of, I guess, what my show in a way has kind of become off of, that is trying to, again, not do the same as everybody else.
Right. Right. Yeah, I love your podcast, and when I was on it, it really was a flow. Like I didn't know what you were gonna ask, and it was just a conversation that built on itself, and it just happened organically. And
It sounds stressful coming in, but once people get rolling, they realize that it's pretty it works for me, at least. I feel like it's a good way of doing it, because it
yeah.
sounds stressful going in, but then once you get rolling, you realize that it's probably the most easygoing way to interview somebody, is to make
Right.
them feel like they're not getting interrogated, like you're contributing to the conversation too, and actually just sitting down with them.
Right, right. And I feel like it always ends up sounding better than you would even think. Like you go back and listen and you're like, wow, this was cool. Like I'm so happy that came up. I wasn't planning that, but I'm so glad. It's
Like
like
I
what
love
you,
having researchers on because I love expanding theories. And when I
Mhm.
have researchers on and afterwards they tell me like, "Wow, you just gave me some new things to think about." Like
Yeah.
that's like my high points for my show, is I love when like I can have a guest leave the show and they
Mhm.
felt like they also learned something. I connected more dots for them. Like I almost feel like that's sometimes like my purpose as far as like podcasting goes, is that rather than just being the typical interview guy, I try to be the one that like connects dots or like connects people's theories. That I'll talk to somebody about this and I'll talk to somebody about this and I'll be like, hey, your theories are kind of alike, and I'll start throwing things back and forth, or I'll just let my mind wander into it, and it
Right.
turns into, again, like expanding on theories rather than just somebody restating their theory constantly.
Right. I love that. I'm pretty sure you're Aries sun too, like me, but that's like a cardinal fire. So it's like initiating that excitement and that passion for others. So like they're leaving all fired up too, but like that's your energy. That's because that's your sun. That's what you're kind of projecting out. So I could definitely see like as a podcaster when someone gets off, they're like, okay, now I want to go do more research because this guy just brought up like things I hadn't considered yet. But that's so beautiful, like in like an Aries sun kind of thing. So
That's what I was saying earlier too, about like I almost feel like I'm more me on my podcast than I am like anywhere else, is
yeah,
because it's like typically I'm the one that takes in everybody's energy and stuff. So I try to like keep to myself because of that. But when I do my show, it's like my one time that my like Aries fire starts burning, and I
yeah,
like really like become myself, if that makes sense, instead of
yeah.
being like dampened by everybody around me.
Same.
Like I
Yeah.
start like pushing onto other people, which I typically don't do. But in a
Right.
positive way, not like in a assertive way.
Right. In a way that's like necessary to keep the conversation going. I love it too. I definitely
Bringing the
like
passion and fire.
yes, I feel like when I'm having a conversation with just like these, I don't want to say normal people, but the people that aren't thinking outside the box, like I feel like I have to put myself in the box. And it's frustrating. Like I leave those conversations feeling frustrated. But I now that I have the podcast, I find that I'm better at those kind of conversations because I have an outlet for like my niche interest. So then I'm like, yeah, we can just talk about the weather. That's fine. I already did my deep dive yesterday.
See, like I have a back and forth with that where it's like somebody coming on the show, everybody has a story to tell. So it's like somebody will come on and they'll be very deep into theories, and that's like more my realm of like what I get into. And then
Mhm.
I'll have somebody else that comes on the show and they've had just like some kind of like Sasquatch encounter, for example. Like they may not be thinking as universally deep about like the construct of the universe and everything like that, but they definitely still have like a story to tell. So it's just like a matter too of just knowing, like getting better with like how to interact with people, where it's like if I know somebody has a story to tell, or like I have no problem at all sitting down, having the conversation, like keeping it entertaining, kind of keeping it in however the person's realm of like thought is.
Hmm.
But just because of like stuff like that, where I'm used to people having like a story to tell or something important to talk about, I guess,
Right.
is as far as like I deem is like important,
Hmm.
it like makes it harder for me to go into the real world and be like, so about the weather today. Cause it's like, even if I'm talking on the most basic about somebody that like experienced like Sasquatch in the woods, like
Hmm.
it's so hard to just be in that realm of thinking all the time and then do this like shallow small talk. Like it's really hard for me. Like I avoid it at all costs because like I don't interact with a lot of people like at my work and just like the world around me, just
Right.
because like it's hard sometimes just knowing, like hearing the conversations people have on like regular basis. Like I can kind of gear who I like can get into a deep conversation with, but if I constantly walk past somebody and they're always talking about like, again, like the weather today or like
Right.
my outfit or like all of this like shallow stuff, it's just
Right.
hard for me to like sit there and have a conversation with them because they're asking me about like, oh, what's your favorite clothing brand? What's your favorite this? While I'm thinking about like just whatever deep method of thought that I'm in at that
Right.
particular time. You know, it's just like hard to interact because it's like I don't want to say they don't have anything important to say, but it's just like there's when you're used to always having like constant deep ideas and conversation, it's just really hard to just have conversation that there's nothing that your brains really sees a reason to like store and maintain, you know?
Right. Right. Like you leave and you're like, okay. So it's like, okay, it's nice to have that connection with another human and all that, but then you're like, I didn't grow or learn. And I don't know. It's hard for me too. I just don't do well in normal society. Like anywhere I've worked, I've never fit in, don't really make any friends. Like within the spiritual community and like metaphysics and stuff, like I fit in great, but like any other time I just feel like I'm totally invisible. Like there's certain people and I'll start talking about astrology and they'll literally like their body just turns the other way, the conversation's dead. And so, but they can talk about like their whole, their dog's like growth on his skin or what. Like they can talk about whatever they want. But if I like bring up sun signs or something, they're just like, I'm ignoring you now. So I'm like,
Yeah, I'll go to work and I'm the quietest guy. Like I wear headphones all day. I purposely will have them in even if they're not playing because it's just like I don't like getting any conversation with
yeah,
people. But then I get on my show and I never shut up, or I go to like a cryptid convention and it's like I'm a social butterfly. But you put me in a party anywhere else and I'm gonna sit in the corner by myself on my phone. But you throw me into like a cryptid convention, I'm walking around
yeah,
talking to everybody, like shaking hands and everything. And like it's
yeah,
all about being with like your tribe, I guess.
yes. So awesome. So, what's the best way for our audience to follow you and check out your podcast?
So I do a spectrum of things, like I was mentioning. Like my main solo show is Inquiries of Our Reality. My Bizarre Encounters deep dive show is Bizarre Encounters with my two co-hosts. I'm in the process of making this Patreon exclusive show called Inquiries, Thoughts, and Theories, which is going to be like a spinoff of my show, my solo show, where it's just going to be kind of like me getting deep into my different thoughts and theories on things. And then on the other side, Bizarre Encounters, we do bite-sized bizarrities, which is like our like mini show we do where if there's stuff that isn't a full episode worth, it's like a half hour or so, we just put them into like bite-sized portions. So hence, bite-sized bizarrities.
Oh,
So I do multiple things. So I figured the best way to kind of categorize all of it for myself was to put it under a podcast production company name.
mm-hmm.
So that's Open Minds Media if anybody wants to look into it.
Okay.
So I have everything connected through that, and then I have my stuff for the two individual shows. So if you guys want to look check out the spectrum of everything that I do, you guys can check out Open Minds Media. All of this stuff is under the link tree, so I won't sit here and spit out all of the
Right.
HTML bullshit in the beginning. So the first one, http dot slash whatever linktr period slash open underscore minds underscore media. If you want to find my other two shows, same beginning with the link tree part. And then it's going to be Inquiries of Our Reality podcast. And then the other one is Bizarre Encounters. But if you guys want to find me quick and easy, I'm super duper active on Instagram. So just look up Open Minds Media on Instagram, you'll see a logo that has like a head with like some light coming out of it. And from there, you'll find links to be able to find all my other pages off of Instagram. So kind of a long spiel, but I'll just send you the links. And if anybody wants to come
Yeah.
and check out my stuff, they can just go into the show description and check out the link tree.
Yeah, I'll add it into the episode description for people that want to look. So
See, it's a hard question because everybody tries to put everything under one link, and I tried to do that, but I have three things that I do. So it's like, here's my three links. So it's still a long spiel, even though I tried to convert everything into one link for each.
yeah, I feel you. I have a lot of different projects like that too, and it's like, well, you'll have to go here or there, or you know, this
I
other
just
place.
started saying open minds me to make it easy. So it's like, all the
Yeah.
stuff that I do, just go here.
Right. Yeah, that's the way to do it for sure. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show.
It
This has
was an
been
absolute
great.
pleasure. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you all for tuning in. Check us out next time on the Astral Hour.